Okay, so in this video, we're talking about measuring angles. We just talked about segments and line segments and the segment addition postulate. Now we're going to move on to what happens when we create angles. My suggestion for you for this video is to copy down all this stuff that I have written down here. Pause the video at this point and copy this much. Now pause the video at this point and copy the rest of it, and then I'll be back to explain it in just a second. Okay, so first thing we have to do is to define what an angle is. Now, the stuff that I'm going through on this slide today, this is important stuff. You have to remember this stuff for geometry, or everything that comes after it is really going to blow you out of the water. So these are just typical conventions, typical naming conventions, what an angle actually is, and basically what types of angles there are. If you know this much, if you remember anything in geometry, you want to remember this stuff because it's very important. Okay, so an angle, the formal definition, is just a figure that is formed by two rays that have the same endpoint. If you remember, the definition of a ray, it's similar to a line, but remember the ray had that little place, that little point where it terminated. Okay, it has an endpoint. This line, this little line, this figure ends right there at that point, but it extends in the direction that the arrow is pointing forever. Okay, that's different from a line in that a line goes on forever in both directions. Remember, so a ray is just this figure here where it has an end point and then it extends forever in one direction. So if we take two of those rays and we hook their endpoints together, so we'll show you right here. If I have this ray and then I hook it to another ray like this, we create what's called an angle, and we use that little swoopy thing there to denote that that's the angle that we're looking at. Okay, so that's the formal definition. Everybody knows what an angle is at this point, I'm sure, but that's the geometric definition. Also important is what's in blue here. Notice that the endpoint is called the vertex. So this little point right here where the two rays meet, we call that the vertex of the angle. It's the place where the angle converges to a point. Okay, so that's important because a lot of the problems will talk about the vertex of the angle. So knowing that definition is also important. All right, so now we know what an angle is. We have a convention for naming angles. So if we look at my little example right here, I've got this angle. I've got points on this angle labeled Q, B is the vertex, and then T, and then the little 1 in between there. All right. So when you have a simple angle like this with no lines between it or anything, what you see is what you get. There are two really easy ways to label this. First of all, the easiest way, and the way that you'll see in most textbooks probably, will be to take this 1 and we'll just call this angle 1. Notice we use a symbol for the word angle, and that's this little what looks like a less than symbol. So you have in geometry you kind of have to retrain your brain to see that to mean angle. Okay, it doesn't mean less than 1. That's angle 1. Okay, that's one way to name it. The other easy way to name it is to name it with the vertex letter. Okay, so we'll just call that angle B. All right, now sometimes angles aren't as straightforward as this, and most figures you see in geometry are going to have a bunch of different angles and vertexes and stuff like that. So we've created another convention for situations like that. So situation number 3, another way to name this angle is to use the letters that we have here. The key to remember here is that the vertex letter, the letter that's at the vertex B, it has to be in the middle always. So we can call this angle, this can be called angle Q. B is the vertex, so it goes in the middle, so QB T. Or the fourth way is we can do it in reverse. We can call it TBQ. All right, so long as we put the letter that's at the vertex of our angle in the middle, All right, that's the convention. When you see the three letters like this, that means that letter in the middle represents where the vertex of that angle is. So those are four ways that you can name it. You can see any one of those four ways in any type of problem in geometry. Just be aware that that's how you can name it. And the reason why we have 3 and 4 are for situations like down here at the bottom. I put a question mark. I have this. Can I call this angle right here that I'm tracing with my finger, can I call that angle D? No. And the reason for that is because it's not clear what D is the vertex of here. D is the vertex of 3 separate little angles. It's the vertex of this little angle, it's the vertex of the big angle, and it's the vertex of this other little angle on the right. So in this case, we have to use the naming convention up here, 3 and 4, to label these angles. So if I wanted to label this angle in green, I would have to call that either angle A, D, B, or I'd have to call it angle B, D, A. Okay? So that's important to note, that it's not always as easy as just calling it angle 1 or angle B. Sometimes you have to use the 3 letters. Okay? So moving on, types of angles that we have. There are 4 types that we talk about in geometry. This might be something that you've been exposed to before in school, but I want to review it and make sure that you know it. Acute angle. The definition of an acute angle is that an angle that is less than 90 degrees. So any angle that's less than 90 degrees is what we call an acute angle. Okay? A right angle is equal to 90 degrees. So any angle that's equal to 90 degrees is a right angle. This is very important to remember. There's a lot of stuff about right angles in geometry. Notice also that I have this little box in this corner. Anytime you see that box means that that is a right angle, which means that the angle is 90 degrees. Also very important to remember. All right? Obtuse then, obviously, is an angle that is greater than 90 degrees. Okay, so anything that's bigger than a 90 degree angle is an obtuse angle. And then finally, we have what's called a straight angle. So that's equal to 180 degrees. Okay, so if we do a 180, the vertex, you could kind of figure the vertex would be a point like this. A 180 is sort of like a half circle, like that. Anytime you see a line, you can say that that line has a straight angle. It's a 180 degrees angle. The vertexes, they're opposite rays. They're pointing in opposite directions. Okay? So remember these 3 types of angles. They'll be important. Acute is less than 90 degrees. Right is 90 degrees. Obtuse is greater than 90 degrees. And a straight angle is a straight line or equal to 180 degrees. If you have any questions, bring them to class.